Senator Aubrey McCarthy.
Thank you, Ciara. We need to make sure his accommodation is I just want to say I'm unusual here in that I wear two hats. A decade ago, I would have had a property in Dublin, and I had it rented out to Dublin City Council. They said they didn't need it anymore, so I went to Peter McVerry, and they didn't want it, so I short-term let. And then the legislation, I knew it was coming, and so I said, oh, I'm going to jail if you do a short-term let, so that's the end of that. But I also wear another hat where I have homeless accommodation, I have transitional housing, and we have about 200 people with the approved housing body that I set up in accommodation and housing. So I could hear Senator Mary Fitzpatrick saying how vital it is to address the housing issues. I do feel we haven't built enough houses, and unfortunately you're going to bear the brunt of that. I heard Threshold, and I've met up with Threshold before, and they argue that every home that's diverted to short-term letting is a potential home lost. And you can see that the unregulated homes in Dublin that are short-term lets are actually contributing to a big crisis. I run a homeless cafe called The Lighthouse, and we're meeting up to 500 people a day. So I see both sides of it. But on the other side of that, I see hosts like Lorna, who's saying she's not making a lot of money, and yet it is something, her granny flat was something that contributed to her, supporting kids, etc. So a lot of those homes, the units that the hosts here are representing, will never be houses. They're usually heritage structure, barns, granny flats, or tiny spaces. So it seems the two, we're talking about the same market, but it doesn't seem to be the same market. And I know the Dublin city centre, that's a key issue, but I'm just, the witnesses here, it seems to be something different. So I'm just wondering, can you quantify the short-term lets that actually are never going to be, can you quantify the ones that are barns, granny flats, etc.? Is there any data on that they will never meet full-time homes? Can anybody answer that?
We can't, because we've surveyed our own hosts, and of our own hosts, I don't know how many entered into the survey. It wouldn't have been all 2,000, but the hosts that did enter into the survey, 89% said that theirs never would. I can give you examples. I look after 2 other houses. They're not mine. They're 2 other Airbnbs 5 minutes from my home. So I tell everyone I manage them. I clean them. I look after them. I meet and greet the guests. The owners of those homes, one is 85 years of age. He's living in Birmingham. He left Milltown Malbay when he was 14, 61 years ago, but this is still his home house. He comes back to that house 5-6 times a year, usually for about 3 weeks, maybe 5 weeks at a time. So that house has to be there and always available to him. Short-term letting it enables me to earn a couple of bob from it, but it also means that our locality, all of the area benefits, but it gives him the money to maintain that house, whilst it is still his primary home in Ireland. The other house I look after belongs to a family who are living in Lisbon at the moment. When their son finishes secondary school, they will return to Ireland. That is their primary home in Ireland. They stay in that house probably 3 months of the year, and then for maybe 4 months of the year, it's let as a short-term let.
So, Laura, just on that, they'll still be allowed rented out for 90 days, is that correct?
This is what I would love clarity on.
Is that under the new legislation, will they be allowed to rent a whole home for 90 days?
Only if it's your actual primary residence.
Only
in this instance, that wouldn't, because they'd reside in Lisbon, so it's their second home. So you won't. You will need change of use planning permission. Okay, so just over the threshold then. So just about data regarding the units that are never going to come in, because it seems like both of you are on different sides. You're talking about a different market, even though it seems to be the same market. So I'm confused.
Oh, yeah. Yes, and our concern has always been with homes that were rented or had, maybe they were sold, there had been someone living in them long term, then became short-term lets. That's the part of the market we're concerned with, and we can understand in these instances that man moved away. That property, once he left, it was probably never available to anyone else. So that's not necessarily a property.
But you can't distinguish between those properties on a register.
No, and then when it comes to the ones that aren't suitable, so like the small units, the converted barns, I think the only people who would have that data would be the booking platforms.
But Anne-Marie, there's no exemption for those, even though they're not suitable.
that will come down to the planning authority making a decision.
Yeah. Okay.
And
okay. So in areas, 2 weeks ago, I think the Caherlock mentioned about Youghal, and I'm wondering about areas that are rich in tourism, rural towns, the Wild Atlantic Way, etc. If the regulation reduces supply in this area, what alternative accommodation then will we be looking at, or will the government provide state grants for alternative accommodation? If not, this is the Enterprise and Tourism Committee. Will it negatively impact our tourism market, which is already impacted?
So from what we understand from the data that has been produced through Eurostat, which I think, if I recall correctly, was provided by the booking platforms themselves, who are the only ones that actually have the accurate data. Let me see. Oh, hang on, no, that's not the right stats I'm looking at. I think it's less than 10% of bed night stays by tourists come from the short-term letting market.
Wow. Okay.
So obviously some regions will have a much higher concentration than others.
So how come the big numbers in Dublin then, if there's 16,000 short-term lets, if only 10% are?
So that's a national, it's 9%. Yeah. So, but it will differ. The concentration will differ depending on the area. So somewhere in the Wild Atlantic Way, that concentration might be much higher, but that might be fine because there isn't as much housing demand. Whereas in
but it won't be fine under the new legislation because they'll be.
Well, it depends. So in towns of less than 10,000, the standard planning applications will apply. So it's not like there's a blanket ban. So, and then in towns of over 10,000, it still isn't a blanket ban. It just may be more difficult to get the planning permission if there's a housing need competing with it.
Okay. I just want to ask just one more question because my time is more or less up. So I mentioned to you 10 years ago, I made sure that I wasn't anywhere near this because this is going to blow up and people are going to jail. 10 years later, I don't see the enforcement that was forecast. How do you think the new legislation will enforce what you're talking about?
The difference with this one is there's going to be an onus placed on the platforms themselves. So first of all, the host has to have planning, make that declaration, as has been said. Fáilte Ireland will cross-check that with the local authorities. If the planning isn't in place, the registration number will be defunct or cancelled, and the platforms, they cannot advertise a property that does not have a registration number in place. And if the platform does go ahead and do that, they're subject to a fine. So there's a couple of different mechanisms that will be in place for that. So it won't just come down to the local authority or just Fáilte Ireland to be pursuing these types of things. That's what we understand from what's in the heads of bill and what's been communicated to us by the Department of Tourism. Yeah.
So it'll be up to local authorities then to enforce. So they need to be resourced to do that.
Well, the local authorities will communicate the information to Fáilte Ireland. So both those bodies will have enforcement roles. And then the platforms themselves, if they breach the rules, they will be fined as well. So there's a couple of mechanisms in place. Yes.
Yeah. If I might come in quickly on the platforms aspect, we are very encouraged by the fact that it's a robust and significant penalty that is levied against the platforms in respect of their global turnover figures when they are in breach. So from an enforcement perspective, that is important.
You mentioned earlier about rogue operators. Yeah. Are you confident that this is the gig to catch those rogue operators?
I feel you're feeding me a bit of a leading question there.
Unfortunately, gentlemen, we're gone 2 minutes over, so we might come back in the second round, Senator. Is that okay?
Quite confident.
Cheers.